The paravertebral block has been around for over 100 years. If you go back to Labatt, and before muscle relaxants, abdominal surgery was frequently performed with bilateral paravertebral blocks from T1 to T12 and light chloroform anesthesia. That was the way they got muscle relaxation. And yet the regional anesthesia community seems to be terrified of the complications of paravertebral block. And yet if you go into the literature and look for complications of paravertebral block, there are very, very few. So my question is, why are we not comparing these new techniques in proper prospective randomized studies to what I consider to be the gold standard? And do you have any plans to do so?
Is this on? It is, yes. Thank you very much for that question. Sort of expected it, particularly from you. And that is meant as a compliment, obviously. When I was a registrar in a cardiothoracic hospital in Copenhagen, there was a PhD out, the first I've ever heard about, talking about the use of blind approaches to the thoracic paravertebral area, touch bone, walk off the bone, and inject at multiple layers. And this was for sternum split. And they had very good success with that. And if they punctured the lung, they had drains in there already. So that was no trouble for them. Since the beginning of the use of ultrasound, I can only say that many of my colleagues, when they track the pleura going either in the transverse position or in the longitudinal position, sagittal position also called, going further and forward medial and tracking the pleura, and they are attempting to try to perform a thoracic paravertebral block, they tend to become afraid seeing the pleura. And that is even when they, in many other blocks, have very, very skilled and good control of the needle. I just think that there's something with that you look at the pleura that makes them afraid to perform the block. That is my general impression. And to answer the last bit of your question, together with Jinn, we have described something, and we mentioned it also at this Congress, something we call the multi-injection costotransverse block, which is superficial to that superficial costotransverse ligament, but below or deep to the rectus spina muscle. And we are going to compare that. We've already done that now in a cadaveric study in Innsbruck. We will hope to publish very soon. And we will continue straight away with randomized control study comparing this technique, which is a modification sort of the single injection ESP block, with the multi-injection thoracic paravertebral block. So it will, I hope, very soon be out for the trial in humans, and very soon in clinical trials.
Thank you. Any other shorter questions? Over there, Christian.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask, with the sort of lumbar approaches where you're hoping to get some local anesthetic into the paravertebral space again, Jens, how much of your, say, 20 mils of injectates do you want to get up to the paravertebral space in order to actually achieve a paravertebral block? Comparing that with when we do a paravertebral block and we whack in 20 mils up there, you whack in 20 mils further down. If you get 1 or 2 mils up into the paravertebral space, is that going to be anything? So have you looked at how much actually gets there?
It's also a good question. We haven't done the Dixie up and down, and how low can you go in terms of volume of local anesthetic injected in the lumbar area. Certainly we should do that, or other people are encouraged to do so. But the true answer is there's a lot of that local that remains below the diaphragm, not entering into the thoracic paravertebral space. The mode of action that sort of local tracks cephalate into the thoracic paravertebral space is, I believe, I have no proof other than in cadaveric study, but when we compared this TQL block in cadavers with direct single injection into the thoracic paravertebral space, we found that There was consistently very high amount of spread into the epidural space, and none with the with the TQL block, the tequila block. So my theory, and it is completely unsubstantiated, is that that gentle track of local anesthetic careful into paravertebral space is more gentle. But apart from that, I'm completely agree with you. 30 ml is a lot of local, and a lot of it stays below the diaphragm.
I'll just add to that, and I think one of the things you can conclude from all this work is that probably we don't need as much local as we think to reach the nerves to have a clinically significant effect. And this isn't actually new, right? If you look at the continuous spinal anesthetic studies, you know that you need very, very little in the intrathecal space. If you administer through a catheter, we routinely overdose nerves just because a lot of single shot techniques, we don't want to go back in again. But I think, you only need a little bit of local to reach a nerve for it to have an effect.
Last question, just on the left here. Brian.
This is a very short question to Professor Chen. Given that the mechanism of action of the ESB block is probably into the paravertebral space, and given that paravertebral block itself can be associated with epidural spread, have you ever demonstrated a bilateral block following a unilateral ESB block?
I have recently been made aware that this has happened. It looks now like it's probably not going to be something that never occurs. It's probably going to be rare because some of the other, when we have done, and we're doing lots of more imaging studies, and we'll do some in volunteers shortly, there doesn't appear to be consistent epidural spread, but I have heard recently that there's been one. Now that was associated with a catheter that was threaded in quite far, 6 or 7 centimeters. Perhaps the tip of the catheter may have gone very, very close to a foramen or even entered the space. So that may have been the reason, but I'm currently only aware of one.